Hey, welcome to another Bible study walkthrough. If you watched the last episode, we talked about the wicked versus the blessed, right? Or the wicked versus the righteous. Today, we're going to continue in Proverbs 4. So if you're a beginner wanting to learn essential Bible study skills, you're in the right place. If you're, an expert and you teach a master class, you might learn, a couple things here. But I pray that this sharpens your Bible study skills, teaches you how to read the Bible effectively. So let's jump right into it. Proverbs 4, starting in verse 1. It says, "Hear, O sons, a father's instruction." Now, the father here, if you read the beginning of Proverbs, this father figure to many future children of wisdom, and a physical father to his actual child who's receiving this instruction, this father is Solomon, okay? It's very important to keep things in context. And he's writing to his children, which, by the way, won't just be his physical children, but any future son or daughter who will heed the voice of wisdom. Jesus in the New Testament talks about the children of wisdom. And I think this is going to be received by the children of wisdom and rejected by those who want to be fools, like we saw in verse 35. Okay, here's what he calls the sons, children of wisdom, anyone really, to do. Be attentive. What I want to do is highlight this action on the part of the reader or the listener, right? Be attentive so that you may gain insight. Technically, the first action on the part of the reader or the listener is to, number one, hear. And you think that would be enough. It doesn't look like a one. Let's make it look like a one. Number one. The second thing is to be attentive. There are two things in the first verse that the father is calling children to do. And this is not just like child, whereas you're 3 years old. This is talking about those who lack wisdom and understanding and are immature in their thinking and spiritual maturity, right? He's calling children to hear and to be attentive. It's one thing to hear. So this is what I do when I read the Bible. Whenever I see two different action words alongside each other and they're given to the same person, meaning someone is told to do something, two things, or someone is described as doing two different things, what I ask, and I hope that you'll learn how to do this, is this verb or this action the same thing as the first, or is it an expanded version of what the first one is, but it's distinct? And I think here it's going to be the same idea, but it's going to be it's explaining that action in detail, meaning you can hear the Father's instruction. Hearing in Hebrew is to actually listen with the intent of applying, listening with the intent of acting, right? Acting on what you're hearing. So the instruction is coming from the Father, and the person, all of us have the opportunity and the free will choice to hear or not, right? But to be attentive actually explains a different dimension of what it means to hear. If you hear me tell you, hey, hear what I'm saying, you might think, oh, just let the words travel through my ears. But if I say be attentive, that means pay attention, and there's actually some responsibility on your part as the listener to do something with what I'm saying and instructing you in, right? Be attentive so that. What I want to do is highlight this that. I know I said so, kind of added that word in, but that's just how I make sense of when I read words like this. Be attentive that you may gain insight. So notice, let's use blue here. This is what you're called to do when wisdom presents itself through whatever vessel, right? Often it's through your parents, the very vessels you don't want to learn from and you think you know better than. But here, the gaining insight is not necessarily an action on the part of the listener, right? I don't choose to gain insight. I choose to hear and be attentive, and the result is, or so that you will gain insight. The result of hearing, I know we're breaking this down pretty far, but really, hear what I'm saying. Wisdom is presenting itself to us all the time, but are we being attentive? If we are, and we're hearing the voice of wisdom with the intent to act and apply it, we gain insight for the next situation that wisdom will be needed. We need insight, and it comes through our decision to be attentive and hear. Let's go on. 4, I give you good precepts. Now what I want to do is highlight this word for, because it often acts like the word because. Because you go, why would I want to be attentive to the instruction the Father's given or hear that? Yeah, gaining insight is pretty cool, but what else? Well, 4 tells me because the Father says, I give you good precepts. Don't forsake my teaching. This is another action on the part of the listener or the one reading this wisdom, right? If you're being attentive, then that means you're not forsaking the teaching. You're actually listening with the intent to act, and then you'll gain insight through that. Now, the instruction here is one way to explain what the Father's presenting. Another way to explain it, and often when you read the Bible, you'll hear the same idea referred to in a different way, or in multiple different ways. So here the Father's presenting wisdom. It's called instruction, right? He's also offering insight. He's also offering good precepts. But then he calls it something else. He calls it his teaching. So there are 4 ways in 2 verses. I want you to pay attention to this. There are 4 different ways his instruction is explained. And what I think is happening is that each of these different ways of explaining wisdom is going to resonate with someone different. Some of you will resonate with the insight. Some of you will hear the instruction and the teaching and the precepts. Either way, the Father is giving a teaching, right? And there's the opportunity to be attentive and hear and not forsake, right? Because these precepts are good. When I was a son with my father, and he's going to kind of transition, what I'm going to highlight here is this, apparently not, is this word when. Because he transitions a bit from what he wants the son to do, and I'm drawing an arrow to kind of separate that. This is one line of thought, and then he's going to transition, to something else and talk about his previous experience. And look what he says. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the side of my mother, which is like weird. Why'd you have to go, explaining how precious you are in your mother's eyes? What does this have to do with wisdom? He taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight, and don't forget and don't turn away from the words of my mouth. Now, he'll go on to talk about what his daddy taught him. But it's interesting that part of his motivation, part of him motivating you to listen is him stopping and saying, look, I used to be where you were. Now, this is where you and I get to pay close attention, not just to what's being said, but how it's being said and why it's being said. Something to do when you read the Bible is to ask questions. Ask questions, such as, how do the first 2 verses connect to this little, anecdote and testimony from Solomon being a kid? How does that relate? Well, I think if you're a kid, hearing your father tell you, listen to what I'm saying, that's one thing. But if he steps into your shoes and says, look, I used to be like you, and my father is in what used to be in my position, and here's how I responded. He taught me. He's giving his experience with wisdom to almost say, this works. I'm not telling you as someone who hasn't been on the other side. I used to be in your shoes. You might ask the question, why does he refer to himself as tender, the only one in the sight of his mother? What is that? Are those, just extra details that don't matter? And I don't think so. I think every phrase, every word in the scripture is intentional on the part of the biblical authors. So Solomon here didn't have to say, I was tender and the only one in the sight of my mother. Your job when you read the Bible is to go, why does he mention this? And what does it help me understand about the surrounding passage? Because every detail is going to matter and bring clarity to the meaning of the text. So him being a son here is one thing. I had a father, but he goes, I was tender, the only one in the side of my mother. And to be honest, I don't know exactly why these are the descriptions he uses. Maybe let me know in the comments your thoughts. But he goes on, he taught me and said to me. So here we have the father. I'm going to highlight the father in blue. Then I'm going to highlight Solomon as a son in orange, right? He was tender, the only one, like a tender chicken nugget. He taught me, and he said to me. So the teaching came through what he said. That's what I want you to pay attention to. How did the father, which is David, King David was Solomon's dad, how did David teach Solomon wisdom? Well, he used his words. Now, this might not sound profound, but when you think about how God relays wisdom to us and how wisdom is, passed on from generation to generation or person to person, it doesn't just come through the actions and the lifestyle and demonstrating wisdom. That's one way. But it comes also primarily through what is said, what is spoken on the lips. And here's what David told Solomon: let your heart hold fast my words. Now, this is almost verbatim what Solomon is telling his son to do now. So David used to say, let your heart hold fast to my words. What I want you to see is that Solomon was told to hold fast to the words of David. Well, David, why do you give yourself so much credit? Like I should pay attention to you? Because wisdom is coming through David as a vessel when he speaks. Not always, but when he presents wisdom to Solomon, it comes through his words. Solomon has the choice. Will he hold fast, right? Another way of saying hold fast is to keep the commandments. And what's interesting, and this is something I like to do when I read the Bible, I go, why did Solomon choose to add this part that David said, or why did David choose to say, let your heart hold fast? Why not, hey, hold fast? That seems to, explain the idea pretty well. Hold fast to my words. Listen to what I'm saying. Why let your heart? What does the heart have to do with holding fast? That's a question I would ask when I read this text. What does the heart have to do with holding fast to the words? Meaning, whatever David is telling Solomon to do here with his wise words, it's not just on the surface level in a shallow, intellectual kind of way. He wants Solomon's heart. He wants Solomon's heart to resonate with and to receive and deeply internalize the words which end up being called commandments. And then there's this interesting phrase at the end. He almost says why. Here, hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and you will live. Now we'll get to verse 5 next time, but I want you to see this. Living is either the result of keeping his commands and holding fast to his words, or living is actually what it is, a synonymous word for keeping commandments and holding fast his words. Now, I'm going to say that technically I believe both is happening, meaning life is the result of keeping wisdom and holding fast to wise words, especially, God's. This is mainly the wisdom that's in mind, which you'll often see Torah or the law of God referenced as wisdom in Proverbs. So life is the result. In other words, the wise words of David, his commandments, are leading Solomon into life. So watch this. Since these wise words and commandments lead to life, or might even be synonymous with living, we can say that when Solomon holds fast to the wisdom of his father, or keeps the commandments of his father, what Solomon is doing is he's choosing to hold fast to life. He's choosing to keep the ways of life. So letting his heart hold fast to the words here doesn't just mean receive it. It actually means intend to live it out. And when you do, this is a theme in Proverbs, wisdom becomes your very life. When you live by wisdom, wisdom preserves you and offers you life. So by holding on to wisdom, you're holding on to life. So it's interesting that this is framed up as the result of keeping commandments and holding fast to the words of his father. But also, wisdom is itself life, and it's lived by. It's something that you want to pay attention to in the text. So we'll get to verse 5 in the next Bible study walkthrough. What I want to let you know is that we have a free 40-day Bible study skills program. We also have an 11-day and a 27-day program you can take on our website. The link is in the description below. Again, it's completely free because of generous supporters like you guys who make this possible. So thanks for watching. I pray this blessed you, and I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough.